Pop culture paints the Masonic Knights Templar as a shadowy cabal guarding ancient secrets. In reality, it is a highly structured system of moral allegory. To understand where the Templar system fits, we must start at the foundation. Standard Blue Lodge or craft Freemasonry requires a candidate to profess a belief in a supreme being. The specific religion does not matter. The Knights Templar is an appendant invitational body. It sits outside that foundational structure and imposes a stricter theological constraint on its members. Candidates must profess a belief in Christianity and, in some jurisdictions, specifically the doctrine of the Holy and Undivided Trinity. Entrants take a specific obligation to protect and defend the Christian faith. From the foundational square and compasses, the paths diverge into two administrative tracks, the York Rite and the independent structures. Within the York Rite, Templar orders serve as the final stage, sitting atop the chapters of Royal Arch and Cryptic Masonry. This religious requirement severs the Templar track from the universal nature of foundational Freemasonry. It constructs a highly specific, distinct pedagogical environment for its members. The historical order, the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, dates to 1118. Founded to protect Christian pilgrims in the Holy Land, King Baldwin II granted these knights headquarters at the Al-Aqsa Mosque on the Temple Mount. The original 9 knights took strict monastic vows of poverty, obedience, and chastity. Their early seal depicts 2 knights sharing a single horse, reflecting the order's initial reliance on donations before its rise to international financial power. That ancient military reality is entirely divorced from the modern Masonic iteration. The fraternal body weirdly borrows the medieval iconography, titles, and foundational narratives. Today's Masonic Knights Templar operate in high public visibility. They participate in community events and march in parades wearing their distinctive uniforms. The modern Masonic order claims absolutely no direct lineal or bloodline descent from the historical medieval monks. Without a direct lineage, the value of the Masonic Templar system lies entirely in its use of history as an allegorical vehicle for philosophical instruction. The Templar system functions as a pedagogical ladder, where each degree builds a moral layer. Before stepping on, a candidate must be a Master Mason and a Royal Archmason. The first step in the York Rite is the illustrious Order of the Red Cross. The narrative vehicle for this degree places the candidate in the role of Zerubbabel, making an arduous journey to Persia to stand before King Darius. The objective of this narrative is a plea for the return of the holy vessels, which were carried away by Babylonian armies, so the Israelites can rebuild the destroyed temple in Jerusalem. Through this historical reenactment, the Order of the Red Cross imparts its core pedagogical lesson: the almighty force and inevitable triumph of truth. The Red Cross degree functions as an architectural bridge. It connects the Old Testament Hieramic legends of foundational Masonry with the New Testament chivalric ideals that follow. Moving up the path, the candidate reaches the degree of Knight of St. Paul, incorporating the Mediterranean Pass. This acts as a structural stub, a strict preparatory step required before advancing directly to the next major rung, the Order of Malta. The historical inspiration here relies not on the Templars, but on their contemporaries, the Knights Hospitaller, or the Sovereign Military Order of Malta. The ritual utilizes a series of banners, each representing one of the great medieval battles fought by the historic Order of St. John. By rehearsing the historic military survival of the Hospitallers, this degree prepares the candidate for spiritual warfare, instilling rigorous lessons of resilience and duty. Finally, the candidate reaches the climax of the pedagogical progression, the Order of the Temple. The official motto of the Knights Templar in the American York Rite is "In hoc signo vinces," in this sign you will conquer. This degree draws inspiration from the 12th century Templars' dual role as elite military shock troops and the pioneers of international banking and letters of credit. The modern ritual requires elaborate medieval regalia, adopting the strict martial code of the original knights for its ceremonies. But the oath to protect the Christian faith is executed allegorically. It is a call to charity, morality, and fraternity, rather than literal combat. The reality of modern membership is entirely civic. High-profile leaders, including U.S. President Harry S. Truman, have participated in this specific moral framework. The apex degree takes the brutal and martial history of the Crusades and repurposes it into a refined capstone of personal, ethical, and spiritual discipline. While the lore is distinctly medieval, the actual historical era when this progression path was formalized is the 18th century. The pivotal figure in this formalization was Thomas Dunkerley, who led the formation of the first Grand Conclave in England in 1791. Dunkerley standardized the ritual, organized scattered encampments into a unified structure, and insisted on proper record-keeping. As a result of this 18th century formalization, the administrative heart of the English and Welsh Templar orders resides today at Mark Mason's Hall in London. The cohesive structure of the Masonic Knights Templar system belongs to these 18th century organizers, not medieval warrior monks. We can now view the fully constructed pedagogical ladder alongside the actual historical timeline of the events they reference, spanning from the First Crusade in 1118 to the Grand Conclave in 1791. This alignment allows us to firmly reject the lingering pseudo-historical myths, such as the theory of persecuted Templars fleeing to Scotland to aid Robert the Bruce or invent Freemasonry. Contrast this Masonic allegorical survival with the actual historical continuation of the Templars, whose assets and remaining knights were absorbed into the Order of Christ in Portugal. Actual medieval Templar artifacts, like these stone knight effigies scattered across Europe, belong entirely to history, not to Masonic lineage. The Masonic ritual relies on a deliberate synthesis of history, guiding a candidate from Babylonian captivity through Mediterranean naval battles to a spiritualized defense of the Holy Land. The Masonic Knights Templar system endures not because it holds a secret medieval bloodline, but because of its precise taxonomic framework, an allegorical ladder that translates historical warfare into a blueprint for personal morality. If you've watched a blockbuster adventure movie, you know the Knights Templar. They are the shadowy guardians of the Holy Grail, the keepers of hidden treasures, and the ultimate ancient secret society. But if you look around today, you will find groups of men calling themselves Knights Templar. They hold meetings, they wear uniforms with swords, and display the cross and crown. Yet these are not thousand-year-old warrior monks. They are members of an exclusive Masonic fraternity. And here is the catch. This modern organization officially states they have absolutely zero historical lineage, direct descent, or bloodline connection to the original medieval order. Which raises an obvious question. If there is no historical link between the two groups, how exactly did a modern fraternity end up adopting the name, the symbols, and the swords of the most famous crusaders in history? And what do they actually do behind closed doors? To understand the modern Knights Templar, you have to look at the rules of Freemasonry. In a standard Masonic lodge, members are only required to profess a belief in a generic supreme being, regardless of their specific religion. The Knights Templar, however, is an appendant order. To join, a Freemason must take an oath specifically to protect and defend the Christian faith. This chart shows the structural pathways within Masonic organizations. You cannot simply walk in off the street and become a Templar. A candidate has to start at the base level of standard Freemasonry, and then follow a specific path to reach the level of a Royal Archmason. That is the mandatory gateway before they can even submit a petition. Once accepted, the initiate has to progress through several preparatory degrees. They are first made a Knight of St. Paul, which includes a ceremony known as the Mediterranean Pass, and then a Knight of Malta. Only after completing these steps do they finally reach the top tier, the Order of the Temple. The entire structure functions as a system of moral instruction and fraternal networking. They use the medieval titles and regalia to teach lessons about charity, discipline, and faith, operating completely outside of any military or combat capacity. To find out where this elaborate system came from, we have to rewind to the 1700s. Freemasonry was spreading rapidly across Europe, attracting aristocrats and nobles. But for many of these high-status men, claiming descent from a guild of working-class medieval stonemasons felt a bit mundane. They wanted an origin story with more prestige. In 1737, a man named Chevalier Ramsay delivered a famous oration claiming that European Freemasonry actually evolved from Crusader knights. A few years later, in 1751, Baron Karl Gotthelf von Hund took this idea further, creating a Masonic rite that he claimed came directly from a reconstituted Templar order in Paris. Neither man produced a single piece of historical evidence to back up their claims. They simply took the history of the Crusades and wove it into Masonic rituals, inventing a completely fabricated lineage out of thin air. The Masonic Templarism we see today was born out of 18th century European Romanticism. It was a brilliant branding exercise designed to elevate the status of a men's club, rather than the miraculous survival of an ancient military order. The actual historical Knights Templar lived a much harsher reality. Founded around 1119, they were a Catholic military order of celibate warrior monks. Their stated mission was to protect Christian pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land. To emphasize their initial poverty, their early seal famously depicted two knights riding a single horse. Following the First Crusade, King Baldwin II of Jerusalem gave the knights a headquarters in a wing of the royal palace on the Temple Mount. The Crusaders believed this site rested directly on the ruins of the biblical Temple of Solomon. That location is where they got their name, the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. This map illustrates how the Templars built their real power. They achieved it through finance. A pilgrim could visit a Templar house in London, deposit their gold, and receive an encrypted letter of credit. After traveling across Europe and the Middle East, they could present that letter at another Templar property to withdraw those exact funds in Jerusalem. The Templars had essentially invented a secure international banking system. That financial network generated immense wealth, which ultimately became their undoing. By the early 1300s, King Philip IV of France was deeply in debt to the Templars. Instead of paying them back, he coordinated with Pope Clement V to accuse the order of heresy. On Friday, October 13, 1307, the king ordered the mass arrest of the Templars in France, subjecting them to torture and execution. In 1312, under extreme pressure from the French crown, Pope Clement V officially disbanded the Templars. Documents discovered much later showed the Pope actually absolved the knights of the heresy charges, but the political damage was done. The order was dissolved, and their assets were seized or transferred. The historical Templars were elite shock troops and highly efficient bankers. Their destruction wasn't the result of an occult conspiracy. They were simply a wealthy organization that ran afoul of a broke and powerful king. A popular theory claims that fleeing Templars escaped to Scotland, hid their treasures here at Rosslyn Chapel, and secretly evolved into the Freemasons. There is zero historical evidence for this. The chapel was built decades after the Templars were destroyed, primarily as a private family church. However, part of the order did survive in Portugal. King Denis refused to persecute the knights who had helped him defend his borders. Instead of executing them, he negotiated to have their properties and personnel reorganized under a new name, the Order of Christ. They kept their lands, maintained their headquarters here in Tomar, and continued to operate for centuries. That is the legacy of the medieval Knights Templar. They started as protectors of the poor, built a massive financial infrastructure that laid the groundwork for modern banking, and were crushed by royal greed. The Masonic Knights Templar represent an entirely different kind of legacy. They demonstrate the enduring power of a good story. By adopting the aesthetic of the Crusaders, an 18th century social club managed to rebrand itself into a highly structured fraternity that focuses on charity and moral discipline to this day. By separating the two, we can appreciate both realities. We can look at the gritty, complex history of the real medieval warrior bankers while understanding how deeply human it is to build modern traditions on top of ancient legends.